Since switching to the Southeast Asian region in 2015, Fnatic have built themselves something of a dynasty there when it comes to Dota 2. They usually have a monopoly over the new upcoming talents. They get the players they want. They, in general, are known to offer more competitive salaries than many other teams. And they've been to every international since. So TI5, TI6, TI7, TI8, TI9. The thing is, other than their remarkable performance at TI6, where they finished 4th, all those other TIs, 5, 7, 8, 9, they've pretty much come in last place. And so there's a question to be asked about the way they're approaching things and how they're set up this year for TI10. Now, to start with the positives, there's a kind of, trope about Fnatic that they focus a lot on individual talents, and it's actually never been more true than now. I mean, yes, in the past, they've also had talents like Midone and Abed and Moon and Ice come through the team, but right now I'd say is actually the most individually talented a Fnatic lineup has ever been. You've actually got 4 players who started their professional careers as mid players. You've got Jabs and DJ on support, who both played in tier 1 teams as mid players in years past. You've got Churn, who is the mid right now, and you've got Raven, who also started off as a mid player back in TNC way back when. And the reason I tell you this is just because usually mid players are the ones who are expected to have the highest level of technical ability, and that's definitely the case with these players. The one who's never played mid really is Death, although he has occasionally switched to that. He's got a creative spark in him where occasionally he sees a matchup. Famously when he played, well, not famously, but if you follow Team D, you have seen one game where his offlane Enigma became a mid Enigma and dominated the game entirely for his team. So he can do it, and he is a remarkably talented player in his own right, even though he doesn't play in the mid lane. And in fact, one of his main strengths as an offlaner is that he's very, very good at the lane stage. He's very, very good at dominating and pushing a winning matchup. So you have these 5 extremely highly individually talented players, but the question always comes up, does talent make a team? And the answer, I think, is very obviously no. We've seen this many times. We've seen this with some of the earlier versions of Team Secret. We've seen this in some lineups, some superstar lineups that were attempted in China, especially like early iterations of Elephant. And the test for Fnatic is always whether or not they can find that level of teamness beyond individual talent. Now, the problems they face in that regard are quite a few. The first one, and the most obvious one, and this is a problem for a lot of Southeast Asian teams, is that they don't really have a proper specialized position 5 captain drafter, which is normally, obviously not every team has their captain and draft on position 5, but it's the norm in most of professional Dota 2. And there's a reason for that, because it's sort of a suitable role to have a bird's eye view of the game and think about those macro level concepts. Instead, what Fnatic have is DJ, who really is a position 4 player, converted to a position 5 to make way for Jabs to play the position 4 role. They had in previous iterations actually had those roles reversed, but right now that's how it is, DJ on 5 and Jabs on 4. DJ is said to be the captain, Jabs is said to be the drafter, but I think that actually both of them are a bit lacking in those responsibilities. Certainly if you've met DJ, you'll know he's one of the nicest people in the world, but he's certainly not charismatic, he's certainly not assertive. If you watch Fnatic's video releases of in-game audio, you'll see that DJ is not really commanding the team. He's not really the one directing, at least in the clips that they've released. And Jabs' drafts, although he has quite a lot of drafting experience, sometimes look a bit dubious. They sometimes look a bit too episodic and not conceptual enough. And what I mean by that is, one of their drafts, for example, in a recent Dota tournament, where the first 2 cores drafted are a Lycan and a Bat, and then in the last pick you bring out a Medusa, and there's questions to be asked about whether those cores have the same timings. Is Medusa trying to play a farming game, or Lycan and Bat trying to play a higher tempo pressuring game? How do those 2 things work out with each other? In that game it didn't work out very well, but it's a theme that sort of comes up in quite a few of Jabs' drafts, that it feels like he's picking individual heroes and putting them together rather than a bigger picture concept, which is interesting because it sort of echoes the notion of the team being a collection of individuals rather than, you know, a group shared identity. So yeah, there's the fact that I don't think they're really Jabs is the best draft, and I don't think really DJ is the best captain. There's also the fact that DJ himself stands out more as a playmaker than he does as a more passive support, which we've known POS 5 to often be. One of the positive things is that right now where the metagame is, it does look like position 5s are making more plays than they have sometimes in the past. We are getting these kind of position 5 Pangoliers, or even sometimes Faceless Voids, or more recently in the pub meta, Weavers. So we are in a space where Fnatic could be drafting DJ, more interesting playmaking position 5 heroes. And maybe that could be used to their advantage then, having 2 playmaking supports in the same game. We'll obviously have to see how the meta develops at TI. The second problem that Fnatic face is about their cores. Raven, who is well renowned for being a very good win condition, the player that you invest everything in to carry you through the game, is also, by definition, as part of that, a very greedy player. He requires a lot of space, a lot of attention, a lot of protection by his teammates. Now the problem with this is that the current offlane in Fnatic Death is also quite greedy. And it's not necessarily about farm, it's more Death is not a player who wants to sacrifice himself individually for the team. He wants his own role to matter. Like I said before, one of his main strengths is dominating opponents in lane. Another one is that he's very good at visualizing sort of the ABC of a fight. We need to do this and stop them doing that, and that's how we're going to win it. So Death is really a player who wants to be involved, who wants to have an important role, who wants to therefore have space and sort of control and agency in the game. And that creates a kind of a tension when you've got both your side laners wanting to have their lane stage be good, wanting to have favorable matchups. I mean, it's very hard. It's very, very hard. In most Dota games, you kind of hope that your mid laner will beat their mid laner, and then you'll take one of the other side lanes. Taking both side lanes is quite rare unless you get a major outdraft. But it's kind of, if they want to play to the strengths of their players, they both play a lot better in favorable lanes. And obviously, in a way, that sounds like a trivial thing to say. Any player will play better in a winning lane. But in particular, these players, I think, they really want the game. They really want to have a lot of direct agency in the outcome of the game. And that's something that could be a challenge to Fnatic. It won't be a problem in games where they do dominate the lane stage and win all the lanes. Then they'll look amazing and they'll look like, wow, they have so many people doing big things. But in the more difficult games where they maybe get outdrafted or things go even, that might be something that challenges them. When you compound these two factors together of the supports not really being conventionally 4-5 partnership, and the core is not really being conventional 1-3 kind of symmetry, you start to have bigger questions about how those come together and how the team is really going to function in sort of a balanced way. So, you know, what are some of the positive things that I think going for Fnatic, other than the fact that they're very individually talented, and some of the things that could create a teamness? They have some really good support staff who I know quite well. The director of Fnatic, Eric, is extremely competent in terms of like his administrative and executive role. So the players are not going to be wanting for anything. You know, things are going to move along smoothly logistically for them. They've hired Power again, who is a performance coach for them, and he's very, very good facilitating good conversations between the players. And so that'll be useful to try and certainly I know they've been boot camping for over a month now before this tournament, even though the lineup formed only just before TI qualifiers. So Power will be there to kind of grease the communication and help them build up. They've also got Sunbi, who in a way has the most important role there as a coach. And Sunbi's role is sort of a bittersweet one, I think, because, I mean, I don't know his work personally, but I feel like on the one hand, to be a coach, to have access to 5 extremely individually talented players, you'd think, wow, blank canvas, I can do anything I want. But on the other hand, to be a coach who has this pressure on him to kind of resolve all these quite intractable balance issues between the players and their identities, that's quite a difficult role to play. I certainly think that some really good coaching from Sunbi could really push Fnatic to being a big competitor at this event, as opposed to, you know, another last place finish that they've got so often in the past. The one player I didn't talk about much so far is Churn, who's an interesting player, and I hope I'm saying his name right, because apparently most people say it wrong, but Churn was playing offlane for a while for Fnatic. When Death joined, he moved back to mid. Mid is the role that is his normal role. And he is a player who I've seen growing in confidence, especially from the time of the TI qualifiers to the two more recent events that Fnatic have played in. Chun has looked more and more confident as a player who can actually be a key piece, a key playmaker, and a key sort of game controller for them. That's interesting, partially because it's his first international. And so to see a player growing in confidence, going into their first TI, there's always a question of whether they will burst even further ahead under that pressure, or whether the pressure is going to hold them back a bit. There's also the fact that when we're already talking about a team that doesn't have a real sort of sacrificial 5, doesn't have a real sort of sacrificial 3, does that even further compound the problem of all your players wanting a lot of space on the map if your mid player is becoming more of a sort of a dominant chess piece in those games. Personally, he is the player that I've thought looked the most exciting, even though he has made the occasional error. But I think in recent games, he's the one who's sort of been looking very much on the up. And I sort of expect that if Fnatic have a really good TI, we're going to be talking quite a lot about Churn in those discussions. But yeah, basically, that's kind of my assessment of where Fnatic are at right now. I wrote some notes about what I was going to talk about, just checking if I've left anything out. They are an interesting team to follow. There is this pattern of Fnatic historically sort of dominating the C region, but not really showing up at TI. The one TI where they did really well, TI6, is actually the one where the team was the most balanced. They had Adam on the position 5, quite a sacrificial 5. They had Mushi, who is a strong, powerful captain figure. They had mid-1, a breakout talent. They had DJ, also a hugely individually talented player. So they had this kind of balance. And Ohio, who was a kind of like a hybrid offlaner, can be greedy, doesn't have to be greedy. So it is something worth reflecting on, that the one time Fnatic have done super well at TI was when they had a very balanced roster, and now they have one of the least balanced rosters they've ever had. I think, if you want to frame it nicely, their upside, if everything aligns for them and goes really well, might be even higher than T1 in terms of the C representatives. But their downside is, it's certainly not outside of their own possibility that they come stone last again, like they have in quite a few recent years. I'm going to be rooting for them. I really hope they don't get a stone last. But I think there's a lot of work for, in particular, Sunby to do to figure out the identity of the team, to figure out who's going to be making space for who, what each player's role is, who's going to be calling which shots, and which players are going to be prioritized on the map.